I am going to get started, even though it's only 1 minute after 9 o'clock. So hi, everyone in Facebook land. I'm Kate Lair, and I am on the CMTA Advisory Board. I'm officially the disability specialist, so for lack of a better term. I worked in disability insurance for a number of years, and I have been on Social Security disability myself. It will be 3 years in June. I have CMT type 1A, and I was diagnosed in infancy. I have 3 sisters. All 4 of us have CMT. We got it from our dad. I have a daughter. She has CMT as well. So I know the disease pretty well. And what I want to cover tonight are sort of some basics about disability insurance, the different kinds that you could have. We'll go into more detail, I think, about the Social Security disability process, just because I think that that's the one that most people have the most questions about typically. But I also want to talk about some other kind of important things about disability insurance, like, how do you know when it's time to file for disability? What's in a good claim? How can I be assured that my claim will get approved? The answer to that one is you can never really be assured. You can just prepare as best you can, and hopefully with the tips I'll give you tonight, you'll be that much further along. You should know that if you ever have any specific questions that I can help you out with, my email address is known to those in the CMTA. They'll point you in my direction. You can always email me with questions in particular about a specific case. I helped one gentleman who had a private disability insurance policy get through the process, and he wound up with a pretty good outcome, let's put it that way. And that was a specific example where I knew a lot about that process because I had worked for many years in the private disability insurance sector, and that's what he was applying for. I don't have official experience with Social Security disability in the sense that I've never worked for them, but I do, like I said, I have applied for and received Social Security disability myself, and in my experience in the private insurance sector, we worked sort of alongside of Social Security disability in some cases, so I do know more about that than your average person. So that's a little bit about me. I am going to say that should you have a question, go ahead and type it in the bar on the just alongside the post. I can see everybody's comments and questions as they come along, so feel free to stop me, and I will try to answer everything as best that I can. I want to start with probably the hardest question, which is, how do I know it's time to file a disability claim? And there's no easy answer to that question. And the short answer really is only you and your doctor can know really when it's time. And for different people, that will look like different things. For me personally, it was my pulmonologist saying, you have to stop working. And me saying, no, I have to keep working. I have a kid and she's not in college, out of college. My goal was to make it until she graduated college. Gosh darn it, I need my income and I have to keep going. And what am I going to do if I'm not working? And I like my job and all of these things. And she basically said to me that, I was going to continue to, my function was going to continue to get worse unless I did something to allow my body the time to rest. And she was right. So I eventually had to sort of give up the ghost, so to speak. But it was not an easy transition. It's still not easy. I will say that the only benefit, in my opinion, to being on disability as opposed to being in the full-time workforce is really the ability it gives my body the time it needs to rest. That's it. I wouldn't be on disability if I didn't truly need it, just like no one else, I'm sure in the CMT community would. But it's not fun. It's not fun mentally, it's not fun emotionally, and it's certainly not fun financially. Anybody who's on disability can tell you that it doesn't pay anywhere near what it should. So we'll just go again with that question of how do I know it's time? There's all kinds of factors that are gonna be at play for you personally. What's best for you? What's best for your family? What's best in terms of your physiological function? Whether or not you can actually do your job. One of the things that finally pushed me into stop working, besides the fact that my doctor was pretty adamant about the fact that I stopped working, was that I really felt like I wasn't contributing at work in the way that I should be, because I just couldn't function at the level I was used to functioning at work. And when I started to feel like I was letting my teammates down, that's when it got easier for me to say, okay, maybe I really can't do this anymore. So that first question, the hardest question of when is it time? Again, there's no straightforward answer. I will say you want to work for as long as you possibly can. Remember that when you do stop working, you're no longer contributing to your retirement. You're no longer sometimes have access to health insurance. Obviously it's going to be a financial hit. And then there's sort of the mental and emotional aspects of, a lot of us feel very tied to our occupations. We get a sense of self-worth from them, and not working anymore can be very difficult in terms of, well, how do I define myself now? Because if you think about it, when you introduce yourself to someone, one of the first questions that people ask is, oh, what do you do for a living? So when you have to answer with, well, I'm on disability now, that's not as much fun as saying, oh, hey, I'm a disability insurance examiner. That's what I work for a disability insurance company. So that's tough. So those are all the kinds of questions that you need to ask yourself. And again, a very forthright conversation with your physician is important too, because as we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, having your doctor on board as an ally, as someone who's backing you up and saying, yes, this person, to the best of my medical knowledge, has functional limitations that prevent this person from working full time, that's going to be the key really to a successful disability claim. Okay, so we've talked about when do you file, and there's no easy answer for that. Let's talk now about what kinds of disability insurance you can get. So there's private disability insurance, there's employer-sponsored disability insurance, and then we have public insurance, which would be your Social Security disability insurance, or for those people who work for, say, they work as a teacher and they don't pay into Social Security, they pay into sort of the state teacher pension fund. There would be something similar to Social Security disability in terms of they would call it a disability pension. So private disability insurance is something that you would only get if you didn't yet have a CMT diagnosis. It's something that if you're an attorney or a physician or a person who works sort of in their own business, doesn't work for a firm that would carry disability insurance for you, it's something you would purchase from an insurance salesman, hopefully when you're young, so the premiums were nice and low, and then paid into year after year until finally, in theory, you need it. Again, anybody who had a CMT diagnosis before they applied for that insurance would never have gotten underwritten for a policy. So I think it's unlikely that most of us with CMT would have that kind of insurance, but there's also a number of folks who don't get diagnosed until they're well into the second half of their lives. And so for those people, it's possible. Um, and that's probably, ironically enough, the type of insurance where you're most likely to get an approval. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but the process is rigorous, certainly, but private insurance companies are not real keen on the negative publicity that might come along with denying somebody who's truly impaired, and so they tend to err on the side of the insured. And then you have employer-sponsored disability, which is usually short-term disability or long-term disability. And usually this is the kind of insurance that comes with if you work for a company of 100 people or more. Usually the premiums are really small for an employee. Like, I know when I worked for insurance companies, you know, it was $1 or $2 a paycheck to pay into long-term disability insurance. So for those of us who are parents and are going to someday be sending our children into the working world, this is one of those things that I tend to focus on with my daughter who has a CMT diagnosis: is get a job with a company that has good benefits, and those benefits should include short and long-term disability insurance, and make sure that that's an option that you choose. With that being said, short-term disability is typically for things like you broke your leg, or you're having your hip replaced, or you're having a baby. You know, those are the kinds of things that people use short-term disability insurance for. It's for a short period of time, usually anywhere between 12 and 26 weeks. Typically will pay around 50 or 60% of your gross salary in terms of a payout. Hi, everyone. And then, you know, it'll end at whatever the end of the term is for that particular short-term disability claim. Usually, companies that have short-term disability insurance will also have a long-term disability insurance option, and those options will typically pick up wherever short-term disability leaves off. So whether the short-term disability lasts for 26 weeks, then usually long-term disability starts after a 26-week waiting period, so to speak. But it's a totally different evaluation to go from a short-term disability claim to a long-term disability claim. So don't be shocked if you go out of work on short-term disability and you file all of the paperwork and all of the doctor's notices and you get approved and they pay you out, and then suddenly you get another claim packet in the mail for long-term disability and you're like, hey, didn't I already fill out all this paperwork? Well, yes, you did for short-term disability, but long-term disability insurance is a much longer process because the insurance company is going to be on the hook for anywhere between 5 years, a minimum of 2 years usually, to up to until age 65 or 67. So that could be as long as 20 years. And that means that if they're going to be on the hook for that length of period of time, they're going to want to do a much more in-depth investigation. And then finally, we have sort of the public disability insurance, which is what I think most of us end up having to opt for, and that's Social Security disability insurance. And there's a couple of different types of that as well. Ultimately, all disability insurance is about the same thing. It is about ensuring your ability to earn a paycheck. And if you're unable to do that, then it is supposed to provide a benefit to you in those circumstances where you're unable to continue to earn income. It is a safety net. The definition of disability is going to be different for every company, for every plan, for every different circumstance you might be in. Social Security disability in particular has its own definition of disability, as well as a number of other factors to be considered before you're even eligible to receive disability insurance. For something like a long-term disability claim, most employer-sponsored long-term disability benefits are what we call a 2-year own occupation definition, followed by, after the 2-year period of time is up, an any occupation definition of disability. And what that essentially means is, in the beginning, they're ensuring your ability to do your occupation. After 2 years is up, if you're still totally disabled and unable to do any occupation for which you are basically qualified to do in terms of your education and experience, then you would still be eligible for disability benefits. Social Security is a whole different ballgame. And when I say your eligibility for Social Security disability is dependent on a number of factors, I mean things like you have to have worked 5 out of the last 10 years. You have to have enough credits paid into the system in order to be eligible for benefits. I can't remember what the specific amount of credits are, but if ever you're curious about whether or not you have enough credits to be eligible for Social Security disability benefits, you can log in to the My Social Security website, which is at ssa.gov, and create a login and a password, and it will pull up your specific information. It'll tell you whether or not you're eligible for benefits if you were disabled under the terms of their under their policy, so to speak, and if you are eligible, approximately how much the payout would be on a monthly basis. Social Security's definition of disability is more stringent than maybe a private insurance company's definition of disability is, in the sense that it is an any occupation definition of disability. In order to be eligible for Social Security disability insurance, or SSDI, you have to, like I said, have worked 5 out of the last 10 years. You have to have enough credits paid in, and you have to be unable to sustain what they define as full-time work, which is 30 hours a week or more, in any occupation that you are reasonably suited to do based on your education, experience, the occupational opportunities near you, etc. It is not dependent on your income, in the sense that it is dependent on your income in terms of how much your benefits will be, which is some sort of weird calculation based on how much money you've paid into the system, so to speak. And it's not 60% of what you were making prior to going out on disability. It should be approximately close to that, but it's not always. And there is a maximum amount that you can earn as well. For me personally, my Social Security benefits are 30% of what my gross income was prior to going out on disability. I'm not quite sure how that worked out the way that it did, but it is what it is. So when I say that going on to Security disability is no joke financially, I mean it's no joke financially. Thank heaven for me, I have a spouse who works full-time, and I'm able to get by because of that. If I was a single parent, I'd be in vastly different circumstances. In terms of Social Security disabilities, definition of disability, when I say any occupation based on your education and experience level, what I mean by that is not, let's say you were an orthopedic surgeon prior to going out on disability and you're no longer able to stand for the amount of hours that it would require for you to be able to do surgery. It's unlikely, if you're able to do other parts of your job as a physician, that you would qualify for Social Security disability benefits just because you're unable to stand for long periods of time. You could teach potentially, you could become a consultant, you could become an expert witness. There's all kinds of other things that you could do as an orthopedic surgeon that doesn't involve doing surgery, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because you can be a greeter at Walmart that you can still work. That's not what the education and experience level of an orthopedic surgeon is not the same as that of somebody who's a greeter at Walmart. So that's not really what Social Security disability is going after, but I once knew someone who was a construction worker, and what they did was they hung drywall and they messed up their hand. They broke their hand and for whatever reason couldn't hang drywall anymore. And they got denied for Social Security disability and couldn't understand, well, I can't hang drywall anymore. There's no way I can work. Well, there's other maybe types of construction work that you could do that isn't hanging drywall. And that's why they got denied Social Security disability. I hope that makes sense. It's important to understand that distinction in terms of total disability and the ability to do other kinds of occupations, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that, well, if you can't maybe stand for long periods of time, is there a sedentary job that you could do? Do you have certain computer skills? Or is there something that stops you from sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day? There's a number of reasons that Social Security might turn you down. And some of them are valid and some of them are not. I read an article in the paper a few months ago about a few physicians from Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, who had received something like $400,000 in payments from Social Security disability in the state of Tennessee, and their average application review was something like, 10 minutes. It would take them to review medical information in an application and then deny it. Essentially, they were getting paid to deny claims. And that was it didn't really matter what was in your claim. They were just stamping deny. Now, I would like to believe that not every state is like that Tennessee uncovered that particular egregious violation of their own rules and handled it. But I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't happen, because it probably does. And I will say that the only way that you can really do yourself a favor and be an advocate for yourself in terms of when you file a Social Security disability claim is to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row, that you are being 100% truthful in your application for disability, and you have your doctor on board, and you've provided as much medical documentation as you can get. That is the best way to produce a successful Social Security disability claim. What do I mean by having all your ducks in a row? Okay. When you go to file a Social Security disability claim, you can do it sort of one of three ways. Okay, you can file it online. You can go down to your local Social Security office, make an appointment, and do it in person, or you can make a phone call and do it over the phone. In all three circumstances, they're going to want a ton of information from you. They want to know your work history. They want to know, and when I say work history, I mean they want to know your last 10 years worth of work history. They want to know the kinds of duties you did at all of those jobs. They want to know detailed occupational information. How long did you sit for? How long did you have to stand for? What was your education level? They want to know all of this information so that they can make a proper determination based on everything that's in your file, because disability is not just about a medical diagnosis. It is about your functional limitations as opposed to what is your occupational history. It's those two things combined which get you to a disability determination, okay? So you're gonna file for disability, you're gonna provide them a ton of information about your work history. You're gonna provide them a ton of information about your medical history. You're gonna write down every single doctor that you see. You're gonna write down all of that doctor's contact information. You don't necessarily have to pull together your own medical records. If you choose to do this and you have seen a number of medical professionals in the last 5 years or so, this could get quite expensive because most places will make you pay to reproduce your medical records so that you can then send them all to Social Security. I personally did not do that because I knew I'd have to pay for all those records, and I wasn't willing to invest the time or the effort or the money to getting those records for Social Security, because that's their job. Everybody has a job to do when you're filing for disability. There are certain things that you as the claimant have to provide, and it is your responsibility to provide. Contact information for the doctors is one of those things. It's your duty to provide that information so that Social Security can go get those records. It's Social Security's duty to request that information. Now, it is true that some places might give them a hard time about getting the records, or it might take an inordinately long time to get records. And if that's the case, by all means, call up your doctor's offices and be like, hey, I filed a claim and they can't make a decision until you get those records to them, and I'm over here with no income, so please can get on that. And feel free to harass your doctors. It's not pretty, it's not nice, but you gotta do what you gotta do. I've certainly done that myself. But again, I didn't physically pay for my records. Again, I left that to the Social Security agency. So hi from Michigan, hi from Washington. We got people from all over, Texas. That's exciting. Alaska, I saw. Sorry, I got distracted by all the comments coming on. So you're going to provide them with the contact information for your physicians. You're going to provide them with most recent treatment dates so that they can accurately request your records. And don't be afraid to provide everything. I mean, do I think that my gynecology records helped me in getting a disability claim approved? No, of course not. But is that a physician that I see twice a year or once a year, or however often I see them? Yes, it is. So you bet I put that information down, just because if they wanted to see all 10 doctors that I see, then I put all that down. It's up to the Social Security claims examiner to determine what's relevant to your claim and whether or not they really need all of that information. Okay, so you provide them with occupational information, you provide them with contact information for your medical information. You also will probably at some point be expected to fill out what they call something along the lines of functional paperwork, which is this really long, really tedious questionnaire where they ask you things like, who mows your lawn? How often do you leave the house? Do you go out? Do you do shopping by yourself? Who does the grocery shopping? Who does the, oh gosh, sorry, my computer is, okay. Who does the grocery shopping? Who brings the groceries in? Do you do childcare of any nature? Do you drive for yourself? All of that information. And there's open-ended responses and sort of questionnaires to tick. And I am not going to lie, it took me a week to fill out all of the paperwork. And my hand was cramping. And in fact, at one point, I wrote on the forms, that it took me so long to fill this information out, because my hands do have some weakness, and that if they found that the handwriting was illegible at times, it was because my hand was getting tired from writing. It was the truth. If you have trouble writing to the point where you don't think you can fill out all of that information, never, ever, ever, ever be afraid to call up the Social Security Administration, especially whomever's name is listed on the initial letter that you get, where you get all of that paperwork. Call that person up. That's the person assigned to you to review your claim, and say, look, I can't fill out this information. I can't write this much information down. My hand can't handle it. Let's do this over the phone. They are obligated to do that for you. I want you to think about the process as, and think about the person on the other end of the process, not as an adversary. It's untrue that everybody who works in claims is just looking to deny you a claim, okay? I can tell you from experience that it is 1,000 times easier to approve a claim than it is to deny one. And there are certain checks and balances that go into that. But it's, and trust me, it's not any fun to deny people claims, ever. And I worked in claims for 5 years, and I will tell you that I never, ever got any kind of joy out of denying anybody a claim. And I had to deny some claims that I really would have liked to have paid, but I couldn't because of the terms of the contract. Okay, sorry, I got off track. So I want you to think of the person who's on the other end, although they're overworked, although they're overburdened, and they're probably not going to remember you specifically. If you are kind to them, if you are honest with them, and you don't automatically assume that this person is out to get you, so to speak, then that's going to do a lot in terms of just making sure that they're going to look thoroughly at your information. Let's put it that way. That's not to say that the process isn't frustrating, because it is, and it takes a long time, especially the Social Security process. And it's full of mysteries. There are times where you get a denial and you're like, what are you thinking? Did you read the same medical information that I read? And the truth may be, no, they didn't. Maybe they didn't get that form that your doctor was supposed to send in. Make sure you double check. And then finally, I want to talk about how important it is to have your doctor in your corner, okay? And it's important that it be a doctor that you've seen a number of times. Somebody who has a history with you. This isn't someone that you've just seen one time and is therefore stamping a form for you. Because they are required for the Social Security Disability Insurance process to fill out paperwork for you in addition to providing medical records. And that paperwork that they have to fill out for you has to include detailed information on something called your restrictions and your limitations, which together make for your functional capacity. Okay, and stay with me because these are vocabulary terms that are thrown around a lot, but I'm going to actually explain what they mean. So restrictions are things that your doctor has told you you are not supposed to do, okay? I am not supposed to walk around without my AFOs. Guess what I don't have on right now? I'm at home. At the end of a long day, I don't like wearing them. My feet can only take them for so long, and I keep thinking to myself, I'm at home. I'll just make sure I pick my feet up really high. It'll be fine, right? Of course, I'm a fall risk, and that's a massive tripping hazard, but it's the truth. I don't wear them 100% of the time. I don't put them on from the moment I wake up until the moment I go to bed. I know there are some people who do, but I just can't do it. I do wear them 100% of the time I am out of the house, so I comply in that regard. I also, because of my CMT, have some respiratory issues, and I am supposed to use oxygen anytime I am exerting effort. In theory, I should probably have it on right now just because talking a lot exerts some effort for me and my diaphragm can't quite keep up. But as you can see, since I am oxygen free, that I don't always listen to that particular restriction either. So a restriction is something your doctor has told you you're not supposed to do. A limitation is something you just can't do. I can't stand for more than 20 minutes. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm going to back that up. I can't stand still for more than about 2 minutes unless I'm holding on to something, okay? I have that sort of typical CMT thing where I sway back and forth because I have no balance. My brain doesn't know where my feet are. And so I have that problem where I really can't be in any kind of occupation that requires any kind of regular standing unless I'm allowed to lean against stuff. I'm going to fall over at some point if I have to do that, right? That's a limitation. I can't run. I haven't been able to run since I was like 10. Not even if something is chasing me. I just have to roll over and play dead. It's just how it is, right? I'm sure I'm not alone. There are many of us in the CMT community who are not runners. Now, thankfully, I've never had an occupation that required running. But, you know, I'm never going to be an emergency room physician, right? I can't lift 50 pounds. You'd have to be able to lift patients. You have to be able to get to a code quickly if you're an emergency room physician, right? There's a number of things that you need to be able to physically do in that job that I could never do. Now, I never wanted to be an emergency room physician because I've always known I had these limitations, so I never went after an occupation I knew I wasn't going to be able to do. But for many of us, you know, some people aren't diagnosed with CMT until much later in life. They experience really, really good experiences. Hold on one second. I just got a question here, and I want to read this one. Limitations of no walking or standing or sitting for more than 15 minutes, and I can't lift over. Okay, I have a lawyer, and she's not much help. What can I do? My question to you, Joe Bailey, would be, does your physician have documentation of your functional limitations? And I would maybe speak this over with your attorney for sure. And I'll say this in terms of Social Security, which is, if you get turned down, try again. Just keep appealing. Your odds go up of approval each time you appeal. It's a pain in the neck, and you'll eventually get the back pay once it is approved. But you have to keep going. I'm not sure why they keep saying that you are retrainable. One of the things that I had my physician write down on my paperwork is that my biggest limitation is fatigue. I actually have cognitive deficits where, you know, if I haven't had enough sleep, or if I continue to try to work when my body is fatigued, my brain doesn't function as well. Part of the reason I'm rambling right now is because it's 9 p.m. at night. And even though I didn't work today or anything like that, it's still late and I still did stuff. And so my brain isn't functioning quite at the level I would like it to if this were, say, 9 a.m. And of course, certain things are easier to measure than others. Fatigue is one of those terrible things that, you know, there is no way to measure fatigue. And so it depends on how good your documentation is. But there's also certain things like, you know, if you have certain muscle weakness, if you have certain low nerve function scores, if you have, in my case, I have respiratory issues, so I have spirometry values that show that I have restrictive lung disease. I don't have the same lung capacity that a normal person would have, and that adds to the fatigue level. And when you put all of those things together, you get a certain amount of documentation that altogether can't be ignored. Yeah, I hope that that makes sense, Joe. And maybe afterwards I can send you an email with more information. I want to get back to the restrictions and limitations. Okay, so limitations are things we can't do. Restrictions are things we're not supposed to do. And then we have your functional capacity, okay? And this is basically, you know, my functional capacity is about 4 hours a day. I have approximately 4 hours a day in which I can be functional. And that includes things like self-care, taking a shower, cooking and preparing meals, eating those meals, and that, for me, 4 hours is not fun. It's not fun to live that way, but it is what it is. There's not a lot I can do to change that. Functional capacity is your ability to conduct the activities that you need in order to live, in addition to your ability to conduct work or occupational related activities. And so if you have documentation in your medical records that shows that you have a lower functional capacity, or if it shows that you are less likely to have functional capacity because of things like muscle weakness, nerve damage, balance issues, all of those kinds of things together, it will show that, Susan, what did you just try to say to me? Sorry, my sister just made a comment and now I can't read it. Sorry, I'm probably saying too much. Okay, so functional capacity, that's an important one. You gotta have a doctor in your corner. If you don't have, if you and your physician haven't together made the decision that it's time to go out on disability, and you and your physician haven't together determined that it's time to file disability, and you're springing this on your doctor and they kind of hem and haw at you and they say, well, it's our policy not to complete forms, or I don't think I'm the right doctor to fill out that form, or something along the lines, then that doctor is not with you. If you get anything other than, of course I'll fill out that paperwork for you, of course I'll do whatever it takes to help you to be admitted to disability, then you got to find a different doctor, or you got to find another way to work, because you are not going to get approved if you do not have a doctor in your corner. There's no other way to say that. And this is where I've seen tons of people on the message boards over the years say things like, well, why bother seeing a neurologist? They can't do anything for you anyway. And there's all kinds of good reasons to keep going to see a neurologist. But for me, I had a 12-year history being seen every 6 months by this one physician who had documented in my medical records my decline, and knew me, knew how hard I worked, knew how badly I wanted to continue working, and said, absolutely, yes, it's time, and I'll do whatever it takes to be in your corner, right? That's what going to see the same person over and over and over again can get you, okay? In addition to all the other kinds of benefits that you can. Now, of course, I see a rock star neurologist who is at a CMT Center of Excellence, and not everybody can do that, and I know that, and not all neurologists are created equal. And if you have a physical rehab doctor or a primary care doctor or whomever you have that you're able to see on a regular basis that you feel like is in your corner, great. But have someone in your corner. And that's important, especially if you start to feel like you're on the decline, okay? Now, what if you cannot work at only 27 years old? Well, Kathy, the question would be, do you have enough credits into Social Security in order to be eligible for Social Security disability insurance? And if the answer to that is yes, and you have a doctor in your corner, then file. I applied for disability at age 38. I didn't like doing it. I didn't want to do it. And 38's way too young if you ask me. But I got approved on the first try in 3 months, okay? Now, part of the reason I got approved is because I knew exactly what they were looking for when I filled out my paperwork. I had my doctors on board. And I gave them all the information they asked for in a timely manner, okay? And once you do all of those things, again, if you have the appropriate backup documentation, and of course, assuming that they are actually reading that information, then that's what you got to do. I'm reading another question. I've been at SSTI for 10 years, 2 young kids. Yeah, it's hard. It's not easy to be on Social Security. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read some of these comments as they come in. I will say too that when I worked in the disability insurance world, the company that I worked for had a Social Security disability attorney firm that they worked with to get their claimants Social Security disability benefits, because usually it helps to offset the cost of the private. And that form is named Doherty, Sella, and Keene. And I've spoken with the owner of that firm because it's somebody that I know and I trust and I've worked with, and they only do Social Security disability applications. They know what they're doing. They won't take the claim unless, or they won't take the case unless they think that they can win. And they only take money if you in fact are awarded. And if you tell them that the CMTA sent you to them and you want to work with an attorney, they will give you a little bit of a break on the pricing structure. So just be aware of that. I'm not advocating using an attorney the first go round. Personally, I didn't want any of the money that my hard-earned Social Security dollars to go to an attorney if I could get the award on the first try myself. And so, Cheryl Lewis, will keeping a personal medical diary help the judge make a decision? It doesn't hurt, Cheryl. Certainly having that information, especially if you're using the CMT app, there's a plug for that little tool, your CMT app that can give you a symptom diary every day. Then, you know, it's not going to hurt. But honestly, what's going to come down to is, you know, the medical information and your occupational information, and then what you're able to tell them about what you actually are able to do. What if your hands are so impacted? Hold on, I'm trying to read. This computer is... I had trouble getting it for my son. Okay. All right. You haven't seen a doctor since diagnosis at age 13. Interesting. You haven't seen any doctors since you were at age 13, or just not a neurologist since age 13? Because again, if you don't have medical records that support your functional capacity or document your restrictions, limitations, then you're not going to get approved. One of the rules, in fact, of being eligible for disability insurance is to be under the care of a doctor. You have to be under the care of a physician in order to be eligible. which is crazy, especially if you don't have medical insurance. That was always one that killed me. Back before the Affordable Care Act and everybody had access at least to care before pre-existing conditions and everything. But if you don't have a physician who can document your restrictions, limitations in your medical records, there's just no way you're going to get approval. Because, and I need you guys to think about this in terms of Social Security insurance is something that basically we all pay into and all expect to receive benefits from at some point in our lives, whether that's before we retire in terms of disability insurance or after we retire as retirement benefits. There's a pot of money that we're paying into and we're expecting to get it back. If you get it back before retirement as disability insurance, that's money that you're taking out early, so to speak. Now, it's there for a reason, and if you need it, you take it. There's no shame in filing for disability if you're unable to work. We all need to live. And in a just society, we should all be eligible to at least the bare minimum of a roof over our head and food in our bellies, right? And that's what Social Security disability is supposed to be for. But there is a pot of money out there that exists and not anybody can get access to it. As a disability claim examiner, one of the first things that I learned is trust but verify. And have a claimant on the phone who would say to me, I've got stage 3 cancer, I'm going through chemo and radiation, and I can't work right now. Now, did I believe them? Absolutely, I believed them. Who's going to come on the phone and say to me, I have stage 3 cancer and I'm going through chemo and radiation if they're not, right? On the other hand, I couldn't approve a claim just because somebody on the phone said to me that they had stage 3 cancer and they were going through chemo and radiation. At the bare minimum, I needed a doctor's note, a letter from the doctor, something, medical records, a form that says, yes, this person has stage 3 cancer, they're going through chemo and radiation, and then boom, I can approve a claim, okay? But I can't just take your word for it. And Social Security disability is especially stringent because for the most part, they don't tend to kick people off. Now, there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, once you're approved, as long as you turn in whatever information they ask for as an update at 3 or 5 or 7 years later, you're going to continue to receive your benefits. They don't constantly check up on people once they've approved them just because they don't have the employees to handle that kind of workload. How many millions of people are on disability, right? So in order to provide benefits to people, they've got to do a thorough job of vetting a claim ahead of time. And part of that means that you have to be thorough in providing your documentation. And I want to talk about another thing. When I said about there's a piece of paperwork that Social Security will send you that will ask about your functional ability, who's mowing your lawn, who's folding your laundry. Do you have to go up and down steps to get in and out of your house? Are you grocery shopping? All of that kind of stuff. When you fill out that information, you need to fill that information out honestly and not the way we CMTers tend to do things, which is to say, well, if I really had to, I could go down 2 flights of stairs, right? So I used to struggle with this all the time when I worked in a building on the 3rd floor. And my manager would come to me and say, okay, we're going to have these fire drills. Hold on one second. Cooper, what are you chewing on? Maya? I don't even know what he's got. Oh, dang it, it's his harness. I'm sorry, the dog is chewing on something he's not supposed to be chewing on because I'm ignoring him and he's a toddler. Sorry, distracted. Naughty puppy. So where was I? They have to do their due diligence. They have to And you have to answer this question for real. So again, back to when I worked, and I was on the 3rd floor, and my manager would say, okay, in a fire drill, you know, do we need to have a backup plan for you? Can you really make it down the stairs? And my answer would be always, well, in an emergency, if I had to, I could go down the stairs, okay? And that's true. If I have to go down the stairs, I can, right? And in an emergency, if I had to, I'm sure I could stand up for 30 minutes. Would it darn near kill me to do so? You bet. And so when they ask something like, how long can you stand? Don't answer that question of, well, if I really had to, I probably could. You're going to answer that question as though on a daily basis, could you stand up for 30 minutes regularly? Okay. You're going to answer those questions of, you know, if I absolutely had to, could I go to the grocery store and get groceries if I really had to? Yeah, sure, I could. But do I do that on a regular basis? You bet I don't, because the process of walking through the grocery store to pick out the groceries and then paying and then getting everything into my car and then driving home and then actually having to pick them up and bring them inside the house and put them all away, it will wipe me out for the entire day. So either I have groceries delivered or my husband does grocery shopping. It's one of those two things, because I'm more interested in using my energy in a better manner, okay? So when you fill those forms out, be honest and answer them as though it's your worst day and not your best day. You're telling the truth. I usually like to tell people, as long as you're telling the truth, you have documentation to back up what you're saying, and you continue to go through the process, you'll get approved. Now, are there exceptions to that? Sure. But for the most part, it really is true. And it's not always easy because you don't always know what they're looking for on the other side. And I'm kind of hoping that through this presentation, you're getting that information. But if anybody has questions specific to what is a claim examiner looking for, I'm open to that. One of the things that's troublesome for something like CMT is a lot of times our symptoms are things that are not necessarily objectively measured. So if you have pain, if you have fatigue, those are things where there's not an objective measurement. If your hands cramp up after typing for a small period of time, it's kind of hard to prove that, right? But if you have medical records that show that you have weakness in your hands and your grip strength and your weakness and instability in your feet and ankles, and that's been shown over time and documented in your medical records, then that is some of the documentation that will speak to those functional limitations, if that makes any sense. And again, I want to say that it's a scary process, but hopefully if you just stick with it and you're honest, you should be good. Can I work part-time at least with disability insurance? Social Security disability does allow for part-time work because their definition of disability is an inability to work full-time, and the way that they determine full-time is 30 hours a week or more. So if you're working less than 30 hours a week and you're earning less than their, it's something along the lines of around $1,000 a month, then you can still qualify for 100% of your benefit. Even if you're earning more than $1,000 a month, it may just offset some of what you're making. And those are questions that your Social Security office can answer for you specifically. But yes, you can work part-time. But you have to be certain that when you say part-time, you mean Usually I like to tell people stick with 20 hours a week or less. What if your sibling has a genetic diagnosis and your other sibling is already on disability, but you don't have a history of documentation because of being uninsured? Debbie, that is a crummy situation, but they're not going to accept your sibling's documentation for you. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is because a diagnosis is not disability, okay? I myself have had CMT since I was diagnosed in infancy, and I went through school and graduate school, and I worked for a couple of decades with a diagnosis of CMT, and I worked full time, and I did it well. It wasn't until it progressed to the point that I couldn't work anymore that I had to quit working. So just because you have a diagnosis of CMT doesn't mean that you're disabled per se. You have to see a doctor. That's the only way. If you're not under the care of a doctor, you're not going to get approved. I want to answer some of these other. Do I have to be off work before I apply if every day is a struggle and my doctor is on board? Yes. And the reason why is because Social Security disability has a 6-month waiting period. And in that 6 months, they presume, I think, that you have a short-term disability or something along those lines that would get you through the 6 months. But essentially, you don't get paid. I stopped working in June of 2018. My first check wasn't until, I'm sorry, not June of 2018. What am I talking about? June of 2016. My first check wasn't until December of 2016. So you've got 5 or 6 months where there's no payments. And so, yeah, you have to stop working first. Now, apply for short-term when you stop working. Do that immediately and get your short-term disability paid. But it's troublesome, and trust me, I understand what it's like to have no income and how hard it is to get by without income. But that's the rules. If you're still working full-time, you're not disabled, according to the federal government. Let me see. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to scroll through to more questions. Ticket to Work program, curious about working well on SSDI, fuzzy on the rules. Are you allowed to work and stay under a certain amount and be okay? Yes, Kristen. So I don't know the exact amount, but you can look it up. It's probably $1,100 at this point a month is the amount you can earn and still be acceptable, and then working less than 30 hours a week. Let's see. Got denied. I think, Mike, that if you have an attorney, that you're in good shape. Yeah, the rules for SSDI will last at least 12 months or end in death. And it may very well be that the claims examiner doesn't understand that Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease is peripheral neuropathy. Sometimes it helps if our doctors write peripheral neuropathy and muscular weakness on forms instead of the actual diagnosis of CMT. I wish that didn't matter as much, but it does. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read all of these questions. Worked. Okay. How do you apply for short-term disability? Is that different from SSDI? Yes, Cheryl. So short-term disability would be either something that you have through your employer or a private policy that you may have purchased. Something like Aflac is a company that does short-term disability. In terms of how to apply for that, you're going to call your Human Resources Department. They should know how to apply for short-term disability. All right. 2012. Danica Tuxbury, did you apply the decision? I hope you did. Okay. The total amount you can make in 2019 is $12.20 a month, at least in Texas. Denise Dumas Armstrong, thank you for that information. I figured it would be something similar to that. All right, I think I've touched on all of the comments and questions. The only thing I didn't talk about is supplemental social security income, SSSI, which is an income dependent benefit. It's usually less money than SSDI and doesn't have the same eligibility rules. So SSSI is something that you can be eligible for even if you don't have the required credits in, or you haven't worked, 5 out of the last 10 years, et cetera. However, it is income dependent and you have to be essentially poverty line in order to be eligible for benefits under SSSI. And they will count things like child support and alimony and unemployment income. All of that will count as income. Oh, that's another thing that we should touch on, and that is I've had people ask me things like, well, if I collected unemployment because I got fired from my job because I couldn't do it anymore, can I apply for disability while I'm collecting unemployment? And I'm going to refer you back to your ability to collect unemployment, which is when you collect unemployment, you have to call in to your unemployment agency on a weekly basis and say, yes, I'm available and able to work full-time, and I'm currently looking for work. And you certify that every time you make that phone call in order to receive your unemployment benefits. Do you think that if you're certifying that you are able and available to work full-time and you're actively looking for full-time work, that you could, for the same exact period of time, also claim that you're unable to work full-time and be eligible for Social Security disability benefits? Seems to me those two things are not the same. And so I'm going to say that no, you cannot collect unemployment for the same period of time you're applying for disability. Now, could you collect unemployment for a period of time and then apply for disability benefits? Sure. Is that going to make your application harder and maybe subject to more scrutiny? Probably. And I think for good reason, if you really think about what you're saying when you apply for unemployment benefits and what you're saying when you apply for disability benefits. Sorry, I'm just trying to read the questions. All right. Sometimes I see something about the government doctor. Sometimes the disability insurance agency, the SSDI, will send you to an SSDI physician. Oftentimes, this is not a physician who has any idea about CMT. They're just going to do, I don't even know what they do because I've never been submitted to one of those exams. But again, I'm just going to say be honest and be truthful and realistic. Let me see. And just keep appealing if you get denied. Because unfortunately, And I will say, if you do get denied the first time around, it may be time to consider going to an attorney, just because it does make your life a little bit easier to deal with an attorney rather than dealing with the Social Security agency yourself. So I see some questions about kids, and it's hard to speak on this because CMT is so varied, and not everybody experiences symptoms the same. I know when I was a kid, I was encouraged to think of myself for the most part like everybody else. I was certainly encouraged to get a job. I definitely was encouraged to be thinking about what kinds of jobs I could do. So I was encouraged to think about sedentary work because it was unlikely that I was going to be able to do any kind of physical labor. So for example, no matter how good I might have been as a nurse, I never would have considered becoming a nurse because I don't think there's any way I could have sustained the physical requirements of being a nurse. Hopefully for our children, we're going to see some treatments sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, I think it is, again, I want to preface this by saying there are certainly some children out there who are so heavily impacted by their CMT that they are never going to work, okay? But I think that that's probably rarer than the amount of kids who can at least work for some time. My dad had CMT. He worked until normal retirement age. I have 3 older sisters. All 3 of them still work full time. I'm the youngest of the family, and I'm the one who had to tap out soonest. And we all have CMT 1A. We just have different symptoms. That's embarrassing for me, but it's the truth. So I say that we need to encourage our kids to get their educations and get jobs that we think that they can be competent in and do successfully, because financially making it on disability benefits is not fun and is setting yourself up for financial failure. So I'm going to say that if you have young children and they're impacted now, do what you can to get to have them be as active as they can be without hurting themselves, and have them get an education so that hopefully they can do sedentary occupations. Any other options for people who do not fulfill requirements, like not working 5 out of the last 10 years? Elizabeth, that's a great question. And the answer is no. Unless you have private insurance, no. Disability insurance is meant to replace income because you're unable to work. And Elizabeth, this is such a very good question, because it's something that I thought about when my daughter was young, which is I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I couldn't afford to do it. That's neither here nor there. But even if I could have, I did worry that after being out of the workforce with little kids, not being able to go back into the workforce because of the progressive decline of the condition, and then being in a position where now I don't qualify, I'm sunk. I have no income options. Yeah, I just want to caution all of those young women out there who intend on having kids and intend on being stay-at-home parents. By all means, you do what works for you. I'm not shaming anything. Just be thinking about what happens if once my kids are at an age where I want to be able to go back to work and I can't, can my family sustain me not working and not having income from now until eternity? Okay, that's a consideration that those of us with progressive diseases have to think about. Sorry, again, just trying to read the questions here. Maya, I need you to take the puppy outside. Sorry, the dog. Okay, so Danica Tuxbury, I'm reading your comment now. I'm wondering if part of what occurred to you is that your joint surgeries was what they were looking at in terms of it wouldn't last the 12 months. So one of the things that I've had a number of joint surgeries myself, and a typical recovery period, for example, for like a total knee replacement is, between 6 months and a year. So it's unlikely anybody who has to have a normal person who has to have a total knee replacement would not get approved for a Social Security disability insurance. Now, that being said, if you have CMT, you're not a normal person. So I'm wondering did they have information about your CMT, or did they only have information from your orthopedic physicians? That may have been a problem. And did they get information from your employer? Because sometimes the Social Security Administration will also get information from the employers in addition to what you say about your occupation. And did that contradict what you said? It's a tough situation. Again, I'm going to say, did you appeal? And I hope you continued to appeal. And if you didn't, I don't know if it's too late, but it might be time to talk to an attorney, Danica, and see if that's still a possibility. Let me see. Denise, if your daughter, so Denise Dumas Armstrong, your daughter's a single mom, 39, and has CMT, she can't stop working for 6 months to start a claim. Does she work for a company that has short and long-term disability benefits? And if not, can she get a job at a company that has short and long-term disability benefits and then work at that job for a couple of years? And then once she does, the short and the long-term disability benefits from the private insurer that the employer has as part of their benefits package would get you through until your Social Security disability income is approved. Does that make any sense? And one of the benefits of employer-sponsored short and long-term disability insurance is, not all of them, but some of them, will also allow you to stay on the employer-sponsored health insurance for as long as you have an approved disability claim. That's huge, because you don't get approval for Medicare until you've been on Social Security for 2 years. So if you stop working and you were the only person who had access to insurance, and now you don't work and you don't have access to insurance, but you're you can't get access to Medicare for 2 years after you're on Social Security to say, what are you supposed to do for care for 2 years? That's pretty scary. So again, this is one of those things where when you're out there looking at jobs and encouraging our children to look for jobs, this is why it is so imperative that we look for jobs with companies that have good benefits, like short and long-term disability. Let's see. Kristen has a question here about buying a house. Kristen has a question about being unable to buy homes or cars on SSDI. Is there any programs out there for people? I don't know. A financial advisor would be better able to answer that question than I would, or somebody who does mortgage or loan lending. I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to keep looking at comments here. Tuition in college in Texas. Wow. That's another thing I forgot to mention. If you do think that you can work part-time, can work full-time, you want to be retrained, you have the opportunity for education, you want to do some sort of ergonomic audit to see what you are capable of, every single state in the US has a Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. Every single state. And it is free services to anybody who has a disability. And I'm not exactly sure what the contact information is, but if you Google your state and Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, you should come up with a phone number. And you should be able to call them, and they may have a wealth of information available to you that you never knew existed, programs and training information. And if you're working with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation in your state, that may be a great opportunity if you're looking for part-time work. So remember that that is an option for all of us. Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. Let's see. Okay. Can they deny you if you decide not to have recommended surgery that may or may not improve symptoms? No, Melissa Wells, they cannot. No one can force you to undergo surgery because every surgery comes with a risk of death. And I say that as someone who almost died getting her wisdom teeth extracted. Anytime you go under anesthesia, the risk, however minimal, is that you might not wake up. And so absolutely not can you be denied for not undergoing a surgical intervention. Does SSDI include healthcare? And if so, how long before you're eligible? I think I answered this, and that is, if you are on Social Security disability for a period of 2 years, you become eligible for Medicare. But you do have to be on benefits for 2 years before you do get Medicare benefits. Up until that time, how you get healthcare benefits is, I don't know. Me personally, I was on my husband's. Like I said earlier, if you have a company, employer-sponsored short or long-term disability insurance, often they will allow you to stay on the employer-sponsored insurance. Whether or not they continue to pay their portion of your premiums is a different story, and that might make it inaccessible for most of us. But it is a potential possibility. California collects state disability. Yes, California is one of the few states. California and New York are the only two states that have state disability insurance, which will buy you enough time to get to SSDI. But California and New York are the only two states that have that particular benefit. And let's see. Because at the time she applied, it stopped working. Oh, so Jennifer Davenport, don't ever accept the denial to make it seem as though she isn't eligible. Continue to appeal. Get an attorney if you have to. Don't accept no for an answer. Let's see. Lost her job. The ex-employer will deny that. She was off for 1.5 years, delivering food, no benefits. So Denise Dumas Armstrong, can she contact her state Department of Vocational Rehabilitation and see if they have anything for her? That would be my recommendation. Do that. It is awesome and really helps communicate with employer regarding accommodations. Yes. Vocational rehabilitation is a completely underutilized, untapped resource for a ton of people. Let's see. Can you work while on disability? On SSDI, yes, you can work part-time and earn less than $1,200 a month. For private disability insurance, it depends entirely on the definition of disability within that private insurance. So when I worked in group long-term disability benefits for employer-sponsored in long-term disability insurance, most policies have a partial disability benefit built in, but not all of them. Some of them are total disability only. So you have to not be working at all in order to be eligible for benefits. So if you're looking to get long-term disability benefits from like your employer, then, oh, New Jersey has state disability insurance too. I didn't know that. Okay, do people who get an attorney always get approved? Cheryl Lewis. I will say that I don't know the statistics on that, but I will say that an attorney, an experienced Social Security disability attorney won't take your case unless they think they can get you an approval, because they don't get paid unless you get an approval. So they're not going to waste their time unless they think that they can get you approved. So I hope that answers your question. All right, so I'm just going to leave a one note here on the name of the firm that I was talking about. If it will let me. There we go. And I know Chris Doherty personally. Worked with him. I trust him. He's not a sleazeball. None of the people who work for him are sleazeballs. Social Security Administration is all they do. They're very good at what they do. They're familiar with CMT. And if you tell them that you are a member of the CMTA, then what he basically agreed to was they typically have a structure, a price structure of they can take up to a max of $6,000 off of your first check, like your back check that you get paid from Social Security. There was a question about applying for SSI at age 60. Hold on one second, Rhonda, and I'll answer that question. And sorry, the dog. Maya, let the dog in, please. Okay. The puppy is distracting me. So they normally will take up to a maximum of $6,000 from your first check, or I forget what the percentage is. For CMTA members, that max is $5,000 of the first check that you receive from Social Security. And then I think they knocked off some money from the percentage too. So there is a little bit of savings in terms of their pricing structure. And I get nothing out of this. I'm only giving you this information because it's a Social Security disability insurance attorney firm that I know, that I've worked with, and that I know they know their stuff. Use them if you need a recommendation. If you have an attorney you like and you're using, fabulous, stick with it. It's just I was asked by a couple of people if I knew of an attorney. That's a firm, and they work in all 50 states. So there's that information. Question about applying for SSDI at age 60. Yes, you can apply up until you reach your Social Security retirement age. You can still apply for Social Security disability insurance. And there have been a couple of questions on the message boards at times about age, in terms of it being easier to get if you're older and harder to get if you're younger. And there is a little bit of truth to that, in the sense that an application from somebody who's 30 is probably going to go through additional levels of scrutiny than an application from somebody who's 62. Because somebody who's 62 and applying for Social Security disability is going to be on for 3 years. And somebody who's 30 is going to be on for 37 years. And so the indemnity, the amount of money Social Security disability is going to pay out, there's a massive difference there. Does it mean that the rules are different? No, absolutely not. The rules are the same. So if your functional capacity is bad at 30, then you should be able to be approved. I hope I've answered everybody's questions. It is 10:30 now, so I'm gonna go to bed because I have to take my child to school tomorrow. If anybody has questions for me, I'm gonna type in my email address here as well. Feel free to email me directly. You can always also send an email to the CMTA Ask the Experts. That will get forwarded to me eventually as well. I'm going to ask for your patience. I am terrible about checking my email. I don't do it every day. I know that's terrible to say, but it's the God's honest truth. So be patient with me. I promise I will get back to you. It just might take me a couple of days. But that's my email. So if anybody has specific questions, then please can you move to another sorry, claim process and rules. Beyond that, they carry no more weight in, but yes, that's true. Joni's right about the attorney. Again, I did not use an attorney when I filed because I didn't want to give them any of my money. I only say that using it is helpful if you have to go through the appeals process. Can you move to another state while on long-term disability and SSDI? Yes, absolutely yes. Good night. Okay. All right. Thank you all. I hope this was helpful. Have a good night. Bye.